As my unholy battle with the internet and the algorithm rages on, I can't help but to notice that a fair amount of comments on my videos have to do with my sexual orientation and of course my looks. Granted, as a self-proclaimed blackpiller that will unfortunately never be acknowledged as such, I not only have asked for this scrutiny, but I think it's finally time to address the rumors. Yes, my darlings, spoiler alert, I in fact am not a gay man. Sorry to disappoint you all. Anyway, I recently saw this video from a creator on the platform called BRS, who may or may not be a friend of the channel.
I remember I told you guys that story where that girl, you know, she called me her dad's name and she told me, she was like, oh, like, you don't think that's weird?
But regardless, I was rather intrigued and relatively inspired by his video. As we know, being attractive to women is quite the esoteric mystery for many in the modern era, but we look at BRS and he seems to have no problem with this whatsoever. And I totally believe him, although I don't even think he really understands what's fully going on as to why women find him attractive. I do appreciate his honesty in the video, where the first thing he said was the reason why women like him is because he's handsome. And that's true, but there's so much more to it than that. Anyway, enough about him. Believe it or not, I've been relatively attractive to a fair amount of women in my day. I apologize for the arrogance, but I'm sure the algorithm will find favor with it, so why not? Now, this is interesting because on paper, I'm kind of antithetical to what women find attractive, according to men on the internet at least.
Then to just attract a lot of women, I would say status, looks, then money.
And honestly, a lot of women on there too.
Ideally, my husband needs to be making like $650,000.
I'm not a millionaire, I'm not famous, I kind of resemble a Tim Burton character if Tim Burton had black people in his movies, and I have very little to offer in the realm of societal success to the lovely ladies out there. And of course, I also look extremely gay. Or do I? I guess you can all be the judge of that. Shall we, my darlings? First and foremost, I could talk extensively about how attractiveness doesn't lead to anything remotely substantive within relationships, and in many cases can lead you down the road of tumult and despair, which is invariably true, but I already have videos on said topic. Instead, I'm more interested in why so many people would assume that a man who wears women's clothes, eyeliner, and has long hair is gay. After very little deliberation, the reason for this has to do with one of the most infectious plagues of all of modernity, which is the necessity to categorize ourselves and identify as that categorization. During the pandemic, the collective world truly lost its mind, and like the downfall of most things throughout recent history, this insanity began with politics. In 2020, everyone, and I mean everyone, became a political pundit, fighting tooth and nail for a cause they became emotionally invested in. White liberals changing their Instagram profile to a black square for 3 days in support of George Floyd and BLM, Christian conservatives finding out about Thomas Sowell through the Daily Wire and regurgitating his talking points about how, oh, actually black people are doing better in America in the 1930s than they are now, former apolitical people falling down the hole of rabbits of Hillary Clinton enjoying the blood of the underage, and how the vaccine is actually connected to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. I think that the politicization of everything fundamentally changed the way that we as humans think of ourselves. I may be wrong here, but once upon a time, we were just people, who of course had our own beliefs, values, political proclivities, and maybe even an ethos, but very few people define themselves as those things. For better or for worse, we were far more aloof about the state of the world, which honestly, I think almost paradoxically allowed for us to be considerably more empathetic, loving, and tolerant of others around us, and also embrace our individuality. In my mind, the pandemic brought on the age of excess information, which sadly has proved to be too much for the majority of us to handle. And depending on the way that you feel, you'll seek out information that you want to find. Then the algorithm will push more of that information your way, and before you know it, you're trapped in the echo chamber, reinforcing your views and biases. And unfortunately, this isn't just an internet phenomenon. This is the way the universities operate, a fair amount of friend groups, families, if you can even call them that, communities, etc. Because we aren't living in a time where personal exploration and genuine introspection is cherished. So how does this all connect to me being weird and gay? Well, it's simple really. I dress and present myself in a particular way that classifies me as a gay man according to what Western society would define as such in 2025, which by the way is quite the reductive take and extremely disrespectful to the gay community, but we're not thinking about those things when we stereotype people, are we? By the way, I just have to throw this personal anecdote in here. One night a few years ago, my best friend and I had left the club and we had met this lovely young lady, and she made it quite clear that she wanted to engage in some rather unsavory unsavory acts, to say the least, with both of us. And my best friend and I politely declined, and she accused us of being gay. God forbid a positive male friendship exists.
That's why I'm easy.
Why is it that the most progressive people, especially women, will accuse you of being gay in an attempt to denigrate your masculinity if you don't want to have a threesome with them? What a shame. Anyway, apropos my point about how we have a propensity to identify ourselves based on singular traits, the main one, especially for young people, even more so than our political ideas, seems to be our aesthetic decisions, or just how we look. All these distinctions we've made for the way people look through all these bullshit cores is easily one of the worst things to happen in the past decade. Cottagecore, opium people, 70s rock and roll cosplayers, trad wives, gym bros, clean girls, Silver Lake cowboys, brat summer bitches, and everything fucking else. Young people have decided that they can form an identity based on the way they visually present themselves. Look, maybe 20 years ago this would have made more sense when the world was far more insulated, but like, guys, we now have access to literally everything because of the internet, and somehow people still continue to adhere to trends. Granted, we still are incredibly tribal beings, but for the first time in human history, we have the chance to truly explore history, philosophy, religion, and ideas from all corners of the world and all periods of time due to the lovely internet. But instead, we choose to watch Mr. Beast and Keeping Up with the Kardashians and scroll endlessly through TikTok.
Why is it that Patapim can defeat Tung 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 Sahur?
It's so fascinating to me that the more information we have at our disposal, the less explorative and curious we become. And instead of employing a little dialectical thinking about our current issues at hand, we revert back to our bubbles and insular echo chambers and actively choose to be willfully ignorant, immensely unempathetic, and all around complete idiots. That damn algorithm, but also that damn us. Once again, even with all of that information at our disposal, we still choose to have these incredibly narrow boxes that we put people in based on the way that they present. But let's also not forget that most people do that to themselves, which is honestly such an embarrassment when we have all of this simultaneously enlightening and abhorrent shit to resonate with, disagree with, argue with, question, etc. that should function as a vessel for us to further our journey of self-discovery. But alas, it seems like we can't evade the embrace of trend and tribalism if our lives depended on it. Why can't we be people with a multitude of interests who aren't defined by a singular belief or idea, who haven't sold their soul to a political party, and who are constantly challenging their own beliefs and are actively fighting against the scourge of trends and visual homogeneity? Well, that may be a little bit too much to ask, but I still think that we can do better than swapping out a personality for an aesthetic. Let me actually address the title of this video. Recently, I've made a new friend and a rather incredible lady, and we've been spending quite a bit of time together. As you do when such things are happening, you regale your friends about the other person, and she's told me that whenever she describes me to her friends, they always ask, is he like gay or bi? I can't imagine why they would think that. But no, I completely take it as a compliment, and I certainly don't mind it when she refers to me as a vampire, but that's besides the point. As I've gotten older and come closer to reaching unk status, I've found the youthful spirit of rebellion as it pertains to aesthetics more and more fascinating and quite illuminating on how conformist most young people actually are. The punk movement elucidates this idea quite fantastically. When we think about counterculture, anarchy, and social rebellion, I'm sure the punk movement of the early 70s probably comes to mind for a lot of us. Or maybe it doesn't, who knows. However, the punk rock subculture, which was defined as a nonconformist movement, quickly became everything that it rebelled against, which inevitably led to its early grave, encapsulated by the now classic idea of just be different like everybody else. If you didn't sport the right hairstyle, don a perfectly sized leather jacket, and stomp around in a distressed pair of Doc Martens, you weren't admitted into the cult. Club, sorry. Notice how so much of the movement had to do with fashion, which of course was popularized by the Sex Pistols, who were literally styled by Vivienne Westwood, who pioneered the punk rock aesthetic. And then you just think to yourself, hold on, the punk rock aesthetic? Isn't that antithetical to the ethos of punk? I thought punk was about nonconformity and a home for the pariahs and the weirdos of all types who don't fit in, not a movement for some personality-less fashionistas who want to be cool by any means necessary. And we're seeing this same idea play out to its fullest extent in 2025, which is why personal style has become such a rarity and, as a result, for lack of better words, incredibly valuable. Individuality is very powerful, my friends, especially in this age of homogeneity. If you have your own interests, hobbies, style, music taste, etc., that's a result of you understanding yourself, and you've already separated yourself from about like 99% of people just by not conforming to whatever societal trend is in fashion, and for better or for worse, that shit makes you interesting. People are far more likely to approach you, they're certainly more likely to notice you, and believe it or not, women actually aren't that opposed to a little bit of external individuality. I apologize for this manosphere-esque overanalysis, but in my estimation, when you're dressed and present as an individual to a certain extent, you exude a degree of confidence and self-assuredness as you are actively rejecting the fear of being ridiculed for not falling in line aesthetically and otherwise. And to women, oh my goodness, this really is so like dating guru. Generally speaking, they'll probably be interested and maybe even excited by the fact that you don't give a fuck about conforming, but simultaneously comfortable by your own comfort within yourself and your masculinity. Okay, base red pill Johnny out. I don't love looking at famous people to substantiate my points, but there are so many men that women absolutely adore who are weird and gay. Prince, David Bowie, Gerard Way, Atsushi Sakurai, rest in peace, and the list goes on. Granted, these are all immeasurably talented and extremely famous individuals, so take this point with a few grains of salt. Like the vast majority of us don't resemble Ryan Ross from 2006. But it's also safe to say that these men were all pioneers of individuality and unabashed self-expression. And it is quite interesting how they all kind of came to a similar form of aesthetic presentation, which is, well, quite weird and certainly gay. Maybe to a minor extent, the closer we get to understanding our inner workings and have an urge to express ourselves as straight men, the weirder and gayer we become. I'm just kidding, but I think we could all learn a little bit from the peacocks. And gentlemen, let's be real here, guys will literally call you gay for anything that you do. Wearing a jacket when it's cold outside, gay. Cooking a lovely little meal, gay. Loving a woman with all of your heart, mind, body, and soul, gay. The only thing that doesn't seem to be gay these days is cracking femboys, but I digress. Men, we seriously have to get our shit together, but of course that's for another video. To conclude, we're absolutely living in a complete and utter hellscape, especially on the economic front. So the idea that we're all going to be millionaires and attract women because we have a yacht and an Aston Martin in our early 20s is highly improbable, to say the least. So why not bank on, so to speak, our individuality, not only to attract women, but to live our lives by? I've spoken about this ad nauseum on the channel, but if all you have to offer to women and the people around you is your money, you'll be seen as nothing more than your capital. And is that what we really want? I do suspect that the majority of us probably want to own a home one day, I know I do, and aspire to unshackle ourselves from the chains of brokey world. But looking at the majority of our situations in the most optimistically possible way, how nice is it that we have the opportunity to actually have women and people like us for us, genuinely. But it's up to us and only us to make that a reality through the exploration of our individuality. And unfortunately, TikTok fashion trends won't save us. I think deep down, we're all a little weird and gay, so why not embrace it? And obviously, that's not remotely going to solve all of the world's problems, but I do think it's a step in the right direction. Anyway, good night, my darlings. Bye-bye.
Dislike and unsubscribe.